Well, 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 here we are. Here we are again on a Saturday, talking about air conditioning myths and controversies of all things. Thanks for, thanks for joining me here. I appreciate it. Let's see here. Maybe you care to see me. Probably not, but too bad. I got a haircut. A little bit of a quarantine haircut, in case you can't tell. But we're going to talk about some quick controversies. These are not the heavy hitting controversies, but these are some that showed up on the list on Facebook. If you have any controversies that you'd like us to hit upon, then join the HVAC School Facebook group. It is our super secret society. We have a secret handshake, a secret hug that we don't use right now. Neither of those right now, but only virtual versions of them. So everybody who's in the chat, feel free to chime in as we go. At the end, I'm going to bring chat up on the screen, and we'll answer some questions or get some of your feedback if you disagree with my conclusions here. So we're going to do this quickly, though, because we're not going to drag these things out too much, as I am known to do. So first thing. Do we break R or Y? That is the controversy, and you do have some different opinions about this, whether to break R or Y out there. So here's the first thing to consider that maybe you haven't considered, and that is that when you break R, you have a higher current load. So you're breaking more current. And does that matter? Well, we'll talk a little bit in a second about why that might potentially matter, or it may not. Depends on the application. Let's go ahead and get rid of this here. So if you take a look at this kind of typical connection diagrams here, one of them is from Rector Seal. A lot of you are familiar. They make a lot of switches, and the one on the bottom is from a particular Diversitech switch. So you'll notice that one of them is suggesting that you break Y to the condenser, and one is suggesting that you break red. Now, if you read into the data, generally they'll tell you can do either or, but when you break R, you are breaking at higher current. And so what happens when you break at higher current? You do get a little bit more of an arc in that switch, at least potentially. Now you have time delays, so, but then you also have a little higher current moving through the switch, and so it's more likely to cause the switch to fuse. Somebody says, I thought we were talking overcurrent. We are going to talk overcurrent. Give me a second here. The next thing is, to break R or Y, is do you want a blank stat or not? And the old school way of doing this, some people liked a blank stat, some didn't. I was in the camp that would always argue that a blank stat was a good thing because you wanted the customer to know. You wanted them to know that something was wrong, and so they would call sooner rather than later, especially since condensate overflow, can be a pretty severe problem. Now, obviously, if it's tripping the switch, likely not causing too much damage or anything, but let's say it's in a secondary pan in a horizontal application. You really don't want that water sitting there for a long period of time. So I'm a little more prone, or I was a little more prone to say break R and blank the stat. Now we have all these battery thermostats, and so then the question became, if you have a battery thermostat, do you leave the batteries out so that way the thermostat will go blank? And I've been on both sides of the fence with this. Again, we're talking residential basic stuff here. I've been on both sides of the fence of this, and now I come into the side of the camp that says put the batteries in. And the reason is that as you have thermostats that have more and more settings, you run the risk of it losing those settings when you have power off. But even more than that, the customer just has the assumption that if it's supposed to have batteries, it needs to have batteries in it. And I've seen nuisance service calls just associated with customers getting cranky because you don't put the batteries in. So I'm on the side of things currently in our market that we break R and we leave the batteries in. So what happens is the equipment goes off, the blower goes off, and the condenser goes off. Now, the question is, do you want the blower to run or not? In our market, I don't want the condenser cycling with the blower staying on under those conditions because you're going to get re-evaporation. And so often what will happen if you break Y, condenser will go off, the blower will keep running, it may dry out the drain pan a little bit, and then it may, YouTube's saying it's not getting enough. Give me 1 second here. Let me check on something here. Bear with me 1 second here. Yeah, I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why YouTube's complaining at me here. Anyway, we'll just keep going. Let's go ahead and bring this up real quick and just see if I can make that work. Bear with me. Yeah, I'm not fully sure why YouTube's griping at me here. This is partially a test run for my live stream later today. Let's see this real quick. Is anybody having issues with the screen going in and out on you? Let me know real quick. All right, fair enough. I'm not exactly sure, but anyway, we'll just keep going. All right, so my reasoning for breaking red is because I want the blower to go off. I don't want it re-evaporating that condensate that's in the drain pan and then potentially causing high humidity or having it keep doing that. I would rather it go off because I want the customer to know more quickly. That's all pretty straightforward. I mean, the sort of decision making is pretty straightforward. The question then becomes, is there more to it? And there is actually more to it, and it goes to the first point that I just made here, which is that breaking R has a higher current load. Here's something that I found in some of the notes from Diversitech, which is interesting. As we have more and more communicating systems, you're actually not breaking R or Y. You're breaking their proprietary connection or putting a call on their proprietary connection. So a common one is like Carrier uses the G terminal. And so you can set up the G terminal as sort of your condensate overflow point. And so that's something to consider. But what Diversitech's saying here is that they were actually running into cases where the switch being used in the float switch was actually not functioning properly with a communicating type signal. And so they actually said that if you're having issues with the test where it doesn't shut the system off, then they want you wiring it through a relay like a 9340, 9380 type relay, which is interesting and kind of tells us a little bit something about how the switches are in float switches. I think they call them reed switches, and that they really don't necessarily make or break the connection in the same way and with the same gapping that we would think of when we think of like a 9340 or a contactor, where those points really go open and closed. And because of that, that causes an issue. And that issue that we've been seeing are cases where float switches are staying stuck closed. Now, that's not specifically with this communicating system thing, but this is just an indication that obviously if it's making and breaking properly with the contacts in a relay and it's not making and breaking with the contacts in the float switch, that those contacts aren't providing that same level of clearance and sort of make and break reliability. Let's see here. So the question is, are connected flood sensors potentially better? The reason why I like connected flood sensors is you can do a lot more with them and you get a lot more data out of them. And so if you take a Wi-Fi connected flood sensor, I'm using one, I think the name of it is Sensibo. This is the Wasserstein. You can connect these up and actually use a connected relay through something like Apple HomeKit or Alexa or something like that to make and break, shut off the equipment. But then it also provides this alarm. It can be audible. It notifies your phone that that's what's happening. And you can set up the same thing with a lot of communicating systems. But I particularly like these because they're battery powered and you can put them wherever you want to put them. And you can put multiples in. And you don't have to worry about how they're wired, and you don't have to worry about the making and breaking. So that to me is pretty important. I keep getting, somebody keeps asking a question about the HVAC School app crashing all the time. Yes, we're having issues with the app right now. You can read all of the tech tips and listen to all the podcasts by just going in your browser and typing in hvacrschool.com. We're having a problem with the app. It's a free app. I'm sorry that it's not always working perfect for you. We're working on it. But we know the issue, and it's probably in an Android app. Just want to get that out of the way because the questions keep coming. All right, so I actually prefer looking at using some of these connected type Wi-Fi flood sensors in the future. I think these could be the future to kind of solve a lot of these problems, as well as notify us better, and then you can break whatever circuit you want to break. But again, to answer the initial question, I'm a fan of breaking R. Keep in mind that these things don't open and close with maybe the clearances that we're used to in a relay. But now, and actually, I wanted to show this, and I guess I didn't include this. Here it is. Here's the slide. One thing that's really interesting about a lot of these switches, is that they're only rated for 1.5 or 1.25 amps on the switch. And so, if we think about that, let's go back. Let's go back and think about a 5 amp fuse. So a 5 amp fuse is designed, at least in our minds, to protect the low voltage circuit, to protect the wires and everything in the low voltage circuit. But does it protect the transformer? And the answer is no, it doesn't fully protect the transformer. If you look at a typical 40 VA transformer, which is what we see in residential applications most often, 40 VA transformer divided by 24 volts, that gives us what the rated amperage on the secondary of that transformer is. 40 divided by 24 equals 1.6666, so that's round up 1.67 amps. And so we're putting either a 3 amp or a 5 amp fuse in this thing, and it isn't necessarily protecting that secondary. So what is it protecting? Well, it's protecting the wires, but if we were to run loads on this 40 amp transformer that were in excess of 1.66 amps for any significant amount of time, the transformer could fail. And the same thing is also interestingly true, because whereas this is rated at 1.66 amps, if you go down to to this float switch here, which is very common for these, it's actually rated to carry 1.25 amps. That's what it's designed for. And you'll see some that are a little more than that. You'll see some that are a little less. Actually, I don't know of any that are a little less, but you will see some that are rated for a little bit more. But that's an interesting thing that we've got on float switches, which makes me think that this is an application where you would want to only break Y. If you have a system that for whatever reason you've got, maybe you're running some accessories on it, which generally you should run a secondary transformer for that purpose. But depending on everything you've got going on in the low voltage secondary side of that transformer, you may need to look at either putting another secondary transformer in or only breaking Y in those particular applications, because the result is such a disastrous one, which is that when those contacts carry more than their rated amps, they end up fusing shut. And when they fuse shut, the system doesn't shut off in an overflow condition, and that's a very serious problem. So when we look at the common misunderstanding that you can run a low voltage secondary of a transformer at 5 or 3 amps because that's what the fuse carries, well, now we're really going to run the risk of not only burning up transformers, but also fusing our low voltage safeties. And so, or in this case, our float switches, our overflow switches, whatever you want to call them. And that's the reason why I coupled these two myths together. So myth one is, and it's not really a myth, it's just a controversy, do we break Y or R? And then the second is about, does the fuse protect the transformer? And the answer does. It doesn't. It also doesn't protect the contacts in the float switch. So an interesting thing also that I've noticed, and I talked to, actually, Joe Shearer's in the chat, and I talked to him about this once, but you'll also notice that on most transformers that we see, they are rated at 240 volts. This is a multi-tap primary transformer, but they're rated at 240, and most of them that I've looked at are rated at 240. But what's interesting is that equipment itself is actually rated at 230. You see 230 here. Let's see, well, that's the compressor, but 230 here. This is a 230 volt. So they rate equipment at 230, and they rate transformers at 240, which to me is just an interesting. It's kind of an interesting reality when they talk about over voltage and under voltage, and what ends up happening in a lot of cases. And Joe had actually seen this, and maybe you can mention this, Joe. But some cases where the low voltage was having issues, the controls were having issues when the utility was driving up the voltage. And I think he had said that he had seen a transformer that was actually rated at 230 rather than 240, and that would definitely do it if you had a incoming voltage that was, say, 248 or 250 or something like that. Now your secondary voltage is also going to be higher, because that's how a transformer works. When you increase on the incoming side of the transformer, the primary side, you also increase the voltage coming out of the secondary. If you had significant overvoltage, that could be causing the problem that he was seeing with the low voltage circuit. So, answer to the question. The fuse doesn't protect the transformer, because the transformer, if it's 40 VA, is only rated at 1.67 if it's got 24 volts coming out the secondary. That's all it's rated at. And secondly, the one thing we do need to look at, even though I'm a fan of breaking red, because I do want the blower to go off, you may have some areas where people don't care. If you're working in a furnace market where you're really not running air conditioning very much, and you don't really, maybe it's dry, and so you don't care about re-evaporating some moisture, then breaking Y is probably fine. I'm interested. I'm going to open up chat here, and you guys can tell me your opinions and your thoughts on what we're covering here in just a second. But those are my conclusions. But I'm very interested in the current rating of the contacts on a lot of these float switches, because what I'm seeing is that they're generally well under the fuse rating of the circuit itself, which means that potentially you could overload the contacts, resulting in a pretty significant problem when those contacts fuse, and then the thing doesn't open up when you have a flood type of situation. So I'm going to go ahead and now open chat. I did want to mention quickly, we are going to do more of these. This was kind of my first test one in this vein, so it was a little choppy there. I'm still working on my home internet and YouTube, so thanks for bearing with me on that. But the way to make sure that you are notified is to subscribe to the channel and click the bell. So we've got this annoying GIF here that keeps showing you how to do that, so that way you will be notified when we go live. I am going to, moving forward, anytime it's on my brand, we're doing something with Speed Clean, and that's on their brand, so you have to follow their rules. But if it's on the HVAC School brand, I'm going to put it on the YouTube channel, either live or pre-recorded. So that's the way to get notified whenever we have something new, just like you did here. So let's go ahead and open up chat, and I want to get your thoughts. You guys have been chatting. Let's see here. What if you have a 90-plus furnace? Breaking R should be the norm. Yes, that's a good point, and I don't think in terms of 90-plus furnaces, but yes, if you have condensate coming off of the furnace itself, then you definitely need to break R, and breaking R is my standard way of doing it anyway. So yes, that's definitely true. Let's see. The only reason I put in a secondary transformer in there is if I had a longer run for voltage reasons. So you're saying put a secondary transformer in order to boost up the voltage due to a long run. You really, putting in another transformer, I'm talking in terms of if your low voltage loads are greater, and so the VA of the transformer won't handle the low voltage load. So for example, if you put in a UV light, a 24-volt UV light, or a zone damper system that had, obviously it's going to have its own feed, that would need either its own transformer or a bigger transformer with a higher VA rating, because you can't exceed that 1.67 amps for that 40 VA transformer. Why not make the water switches with higher contact ratings? Well, that is, and there are some out there that are. You just have to pay attention to it. That's all I'm saying. Joe says, yes, Rheem has 230 volts in some models, and I had almost 29 volts at 251 incoming. This is really key here. And this is kind of what I was trying to point out. I don't, in the equipment I work on, I don't see this regularly, but if you have a 230 volt primary transformer and you've got 250 volt incoming, you could have very high secondary voltage, and that could cause pretty significant problems. Honeywell T6 is annoying when it loses power, is what Frank says. Yeah, so that's a reason why I don't like losing the power to the thing. Let's see here. Joe's upset that Honeywell stopped making the 5000. Yeah, I'm a fan of the 5000. I like the 5000. He said they started again now. That's good. And that is still one of my favorite kind of base thermostats. Used it for so long. Somebody says we use 1.7 amp fuses on 40 VA. Well, I have never seen that before. I would love to see a model number or something on a 1.7 amp fuse, blade type fuse. But yeah, that's very interesting. If the system has a 3 amp fuse, but you put a 5 amp fuse, will it cause an issue down the road? It could. I mean, generally speaking, you're going to see 3 amp fuses on equipment where the controls the board, whatever, require a 3-amp fuse to properly protect it. Like I said, it's not like you're going to overload your transformer. It's not like you're going to run 2 amps on it and it's going to burn out like that. But it will decrease its life and potentially cause it to fail. So the point is that a 40 VA transformer at 24-volt secondary is only designed for 1.67 amps. Keith says, I always broke R so that it shuts the system down totally, immediately or near immediately indicates an issue, and that's exactly it. I would much rather see it done that way. And in fact, if they're going to do anything with fuses, I would rather they decrease the size so that they blow quicker, but then you're going to have more nuisance blowing fuses and that sort of thing. Because even in your secondary, even the low voltage side of your system, you have inductive loads that draw spiked current initially as they're energized. Even things like solenoids, they're going to draw a slightly higher current, and you could have these little peaks. And putting it too small of a fuse in could cause that. A lot of communicating systems that are out now have a dedicated terminal on the control board for safeties, so you get an error message on the stat. Yeah, and that's good. But what I was pointing out is if you look at that Diversitech guide, it's saying that in some cases the switches that they're using actually aren't working properly with communicating systems. And my guess would be that they're probably not making completely. They make it sound like they're not breaking, which seems unlikely. But I don't know. Maybe there's some situation in which that's possible. But on those switches, the point is they don't have that open and close clearance like we're used to on a contactor or a relay. And because of that, they act a little. They can act a little odd. I think that's it for now. So that's it. That's my myth. I prefer, not a myth, the controversy. I prefer breaking R, but I also want you to watch out for those float switches and making sure that they are actually making and breaking the circuit. And to answer the question that was coming in during the chat, why isn't the app working well? On Android especially, we know we have issues. It's already in the pipeline to fix it.